Welcome to the second chapter in the series of Histology from Best Medicine. In this chapter, we'll be going over the connective tissue. In the previous chapter, we studied the epithelial tissue, which consisted of a group of aggregated polyhedral cells. So it was something like this, and all these cells were polyhedral, meaning they had multiple domains or faces. So basal, lateral, and apical domains, and then we studied all their modifications on apical, lateral, and basal domains, and then they were connected basally to an extracellular. They had an extracellular matrix over here, and over here they were connected to the basement membrane, which was their ECM. And now for the connective tissue, however, we're going to be studying something a little bit different. So let me just draw a box here, and let me show you an example of how a connective tissue would look like before we begin. So in this particular tissue, there would be a number of cells, right? And they will not be aggregated, and they wouldn't have the polyhedral or multiple faces nature. They would just be stranded in a tissue and surrounded by the extracellular matrix. All right? So this would be your ECM, and these would be your groups of cells, and they would just exist like this. And this connective tissue would provide the function of connecting two specialized tissues together and facilitating them in their functions. So for example, in the last chapter we studied the intestinal columnar epithelium. So simple columnar, simple means one layer of cells, and columnar means columnar cells. And then out over here would be your connective tissue right here, and this would not only facilitate the transport but also provide a connection point between the simple columnar epithelium and the, let's just say, the smooth muscle layers outside. So these would be maybe your circular muscles and then your longitudinal muscle layer in the intestinal epithelium, in the intestinal wall. Or in anatomy, you might have studied the aponeurosis, maybe in the skull. So inside the skull, we have on the anterior side we have the frontalis muscle, and then on the posterior side we have the septalis muscle, and then between them is like an aponeurosis. Or inside the bones, you might have studied, like for example, this is a bone, and then this is another bone right here, and between them is a muscle. So let's say that this muscle emerges from here and attaches to this bone. And this attachment point right here is called a tendon, and this would be an example of another connective tissue because it's connecting the muscle to the bone. This one right here is connecting two muscles together. This one right here, it's connecting the epithelium to the muscular layer, and stuff like that. We will come across more examples as we go on with the lecture. Alright, so let's jump back to this photo right here again. So we studied that the connective tissue so far is made up of extracellular matrix. There's a lot of it. There's a lot and lots of ECM. Actually, primarily the connective tissue is the extracellular matrix. And then there's some cells in there. So two things that make up the connective tissue, the ECM and the cells. So let's see what the cell types are. So let's do the cells first. Only the cell types. Let me just mention the cell types. So primarily these are fibroblasts. Fibroblasts, by the way, originate from embryo mesenchyme. Let me just teach you what the mesenchyme is. Primarily the embryo mesenderm, you might have studied in embryology. Let me just show you over here. So embryology, the embryo has 3 layers. So let me just draw 3 layers real quick. Okay, this would be your ectoderm, mesoderm, and then endoderm. Okay, and this mesoderm part would primarily be your supplier of the mesenchymal stem cells, or as they're called, M for mesenchymal, S for stem, and then C for cells, mesenchymal cells. These are pluripotent stem cells. Means they have the ability to divide and form any type of cell in the body. And the fibroblasts originate from the mesenchyme. So one of the cell types that may be present in the connective tissue is fibroblast. Another would be your macrophages. These are white blood cells. We will study them in detail in a bit. Macrophages, mast cells, and plasma cells. We will study each of these in detail in a bit. Okay, macrophages, by the way, these are leukocytes, so they leukocytes. Okay, white blood cells, they originate from we study the origin here for the fibroblasts. So they originate from the hematopoietic stem cell, which is present in your bone marrow. So for example, there's a bone, okay, and then this would be its bone marrow, and inside it contains the hematopoietic, something like that, stem cell. We will do all of this in its own chapter, so you don't have to worry about it. And yeah, so these are 4 of the most common cell types that may be present in the connective tissue, on top of the other cells that I might mention later or not. And then the second thing that we learned was that apart from cells, it contains a huge amount of ECM. Primarily is the ECM. So extracellular matrix, and then the extracellular matrix consists of 2 things. Extracellular matrix usually consists of number 1, protein fibers. Okay, and this would be, for example, your collagen. Collagen we've come across in the previous chapter when we were doing the epithelium, that in the basal lamina it contains type 4 collagen, in the reticular lamina it contains type 3 and type 7 collagen. We studied that earlier, and now in this chapter we will study the details of what collagen is, how it's formed, and everything. Protein fibers, and number 2 is your ground substance. Remember me mentioning the ground substance when we were doing the ECM in the previous chapter. I promised to teach you guys the ground substance and its details in this chapter, and we will do it in this chapter later, just in a bit after we do the protein fibers. So this ground substance is mainly made up of glycosaminoglycans and proteoglycans and hyaluronic acid and stuff like that. Let me just write that down. These are glycosaminoglycans, proteoglycans, proteins like laminin. Laminin we studied earlier, that it's the protein that attaches integrin to integrin in the basal lamina. Anyways, so we have studied the cell types, the cell types and the ECM and what it contains. By the way, I have a little fun fact for you guys if you are interested. There's this, so we studied this origin mesenchymal stem cells, and these are pluripotent, which means that they can form any type of cell in the body. And in a human adult, these are also present. So they've discovered that the MSCs are present. MSCs, which are the mesenchymal stem cells, these may be present inside either your tooth pulp or adipose tissue. We will study this later in the coming chapter, what that is. And these can be extracted to use for tissue regeneration. So because they have the tendency or the ability to form any kind of tissue, they can be extracted from your tooth pulp or adipose tissue, and they can be used for tissue regeneration. And research is currently going on to make this thing work.